This is episode 248, and we're going to talk about thoughts or mental traps that keep leaders stuck. Here are the two questions this podcast answers. One, how do you successfully transition into your first official leadership role? And two, how do you keep climbing that leadership ladder and continuously get promoted, although the competition and the expectations get bigger? This show, the Manager Track podcast, will provide the answers. I'm your host, Ramona Shaw. I'm on a mission to create workplaces where work is seen as a source of contribution, connection, and personal fulfillment. And this transition starts with developing a new generation of leaders who know how to lead so everyone wins and grows. In the show, you'll learn how to think, communicate, and act as a confident and competent leader you know you can be. Hi there, and welcome back to the Manager Track podcast, or this show. For those of you who've been listening to the podcast but haven't seen our YouTube channel yet, check out the show notes and visit us on YouTube. Subscribe so you get future episodes on your YouTube feed as well. So today we're going to dive into what I believe doesn't get enough attention when it comes to leadership development. And that is the mindsets, the beliefs, the thought, the internal identities that keep us stuck at lower levels, often in the tactical work and in the weeds of execution versus leading at a higher level, at a more strategic level, and kind of commanding a room and showing up as more confident and influential leaders. As much as I believe that the tactical work of leadership development is really useful in our programs, such as the Leadership Accelerator for new managers, we provide guides, frameworks, scripts, templates, resources to make it easier to apply what we learn. For example, when it comes to difficult conversations, hey, here are a few ways to introduce a conversation. Here are the different phases of a difficult conversation that you want to prepare for. Here is how you wrap up in an effective way such a difficult conversation. Or the same with feedback. When you give feedback that is fairly intense and it's one of those sit down, tough conversations, that kind of feedback, then here's the one thing that you do not want to miss that will change the dynamic of the conversation. So these are tactical suggestions that we provide, and they're valuable. But then at the same time, and this is what we cannot underestimate, we have to think about and address the internal dialogue that's happening inside of our heads that will hold us back in patterns that aren't helpful. And so the reason why our programs and our Leadership Accelerator, for example, is 12 weeks long is because these internal shifts don't happen overnight or in a micro lesson, a 2-minute video, or even a 1 hour class. They take time. But what I want to do in this podcast today is to highlight what are some of these internal mental traps or thoughts that keep leaders stuck. And while we often talk about transitioning into leadership, what I'm going to talk about here are mental traps, thoughts that I observe in leaders, even if they have decades of leadership experience. So, in the work with both new and experienced managers, the 5 particular mental traps are often hard to break, and they're even more difficult to break if you're not aware of them. So I want to break them down and explore not just why they're problematic, but also give examples on how they show up so you can detect whether you're falling into one of those traps yourself. And if you do, then know these are very common. There's nothing wrong with where you're at. And it simply means, there's some work to do. I've seen something now that I didn't see before. If you want to dive deeper and take this work further and accelerate your leadership growth, then join us in the Leadership Accelerator. Let's hop on a call and have a conversation to see if this is the right program for you. So, with that said, let's dive in. I'm going to go straight to it. The first one is the I must do everything mindset. And it's not like you literally think you must be doing everything on the team. You realize, no, we're a team, and obviously I'm not doing everything. But it is kind of this idea that you feel like you need to roll up your sleeves. It's this roll up your sleeves syndrome. The idea that good leaders must be very hands on with everything or with a lot of things. And it often manifests itself in an inability or lack of effectiveness in delegation. I hear managers say, like, I can't delegate. My team is already too busy. But then my question is, do you actually know for a fact they're too busy, or are you assuming they're too busy? Employees want to be given the opportunities to grow and to develop. So while some team members may, yes, totally have a full plate, they may still welcome taking something off your plate because they can see an opportunity for them to learn. It may also be that you make an assumption that they're really busy, when in fact they aren't. I can give you an endless list of situations with leaders where I asked them directly that question, and they came back in the next coaching conversation and said, "Hey, I did a check-in. I usually recommend asking on a scale from 1 to 5, how busy are you?" Without going into too much details here. But what their assumption is that they'll be at a 4.5 or a 5, and then they come back and realize, like, actually, no, the team is at the 3, and they all have capacity to take on more work. It's just that, yeah, generally speaking, like, we're pretty good, right? And I'm full. But if you want me to delegate work, I can definitely make room for that. So if you think they're too busy, make sure you know for a fact before you make that assumption. And then when you do want to delegate something, be transparent about your intention. You can say, "Hey, I'd like to delegate this project, but before I do, I want to check in on everyone's capacity and see who might be interested to take this on." This could also be a good development opportunity. And then hear them out and see what they say. Let them have the option to help you. This mindset of like, I need to be all rolling up my sleeves and being all hands on shows up in how we run meetings. If you are doing all the talking in team meetings because you think that's what leaders should do, like let's say you present the goals for 2025, or you do a project review and you are the one doing all the talking and everyone else just listening, you're missing out on the collective, the interaction between the team, it actually feeling like a team and there being collaboration. A study by MIT's Human Dynamic Laboratory found that the most successful teams actually have distributed participation rather than the dominant leader driving the show. And so this is really important. Not only does it feel better, does it lighten your load, but it keeps people engaged and performance on the team high. So anytime that you notice yourself thinking, "Oh, I need to be doing this because I'm the leader," take a beat. Ask yourself, is this really true? When you onboard a new hire and you feel like, "Oh, I need to be the one doing all the onboarding work because I got to demonstrate that I am the leader and I'm the one who's sort of like in charge here." No, you don't. You need to do a few key things that no one else can do. And then let the whole team onboard that new team member as a collective, collaborative sort of mini project for everyone to participate in. Moving on. Second, a sort of mental trap or thought to be aware of is this idea that the leader must be the most knowledgeable person in the room. This is particularly challenging when you start to manage specialists or subject matter experts that know more than you do. So here's a common scenario. My manager tells me, "Hey, I'm getting a new team member in areas that I'm not so familiar with, and I'm a little bit nervous. So I think I need to learn and spend some time to learn about their field and the work that they do so I can probably, manage them." But wait a minute. Do you really? The most effective leaders don't try to be experts in everything. They create environments where experts can flourish. In Google's project Oxygen Research, which is one of the most often cited sort of projects when it comes to studying great leadership and team leadership, found that technical expertise was actually one of the least important factors in what makes a great manager. What ranked higher were all the things such as ability to coach, to communicate, and support career development. So, yes, you need to know enough to help them understand how their role fits into the bigger picture. You need to know enough, or at least be curious enough, to learn about the work that they do, to challenge their thinking, to make sure that you challenge assumptions, that you're able to assess what high standards are, what poor standards are. But that's kind of about it. If you depend on that team member having respect for you as a leader because of your knowledge and your expertise, you're going to keep a lid on your ability to grow as a leader because that only works so far. And once you break it, you sort of move away from frontline leadership, or you start to manage experts in different fields, your main goal is to hire people who know a lot more than you do, right? And at that point, you'll have to let go of this mental trap that you need to be the most knowledgeable person in the room. The third trap here, mental trap, I want to highlight in this episode is this idea that senior leaders know the most or know the best. The idea that by virtue of their position and tenure, your senior leaders know better. While sure, it's often true that I have valuable experience and institutional knowledge, this mindset can be quite limiting for multiple reasons. First, it prevents you from speaking up when you see issues or opportunities. You may think, oh, they already know, or if they're not bothered by it, if they don't have an issue with it, then it's probably not a problem. But your unique perspective, especially if you are closer to the day-to-day operations or you have different expertise than your senior leaders, you have an angle and a viewpoint of the organization that they don't. So your diversity in the mix is a value add. No one else sees what you see. No one else has worked at the companies you've worked at before. No one else has exposure to exactly the same work or the same data or is able to connect the dots in the way that you do. Also, some people are wired to see risks. You might be one of those. You're constantly looking at what are the risks that I'm having to navigate here. Your leader might be a visionary. They don't see that. They don't pay attention to that. That's not where their strength is. So don't underestimate the importance of that. So on that point of diversity, McKinsey research shows that organizations with diverse perspectives and healthy debate at all levels, up and down, make better decisions and perform better financially. And on top of that, when you speak up and you don't assume they know better, but you value your own position, your opinion, your perspective, not only is that going to help your team perform better, but also senior leaders often evaluate the leadership potential of sort of up and coming leaders on their ability to be challenged and to have conviction when being challenged. When you talk about executive presence, this isn't about agreeing with everything. It's really about taking a stance and having the confidence to engage in a constructive dialogue when it means to respectfully disagree with senior colleagues and make a case for your opinion, not to hear them say, oh, but I disagree with that, and then immediately waver and agree with them just because they are more senior. I've seen many managers hold themselves back because they assume senior leaders have already thought through angles of a problem. But again, in the fast moving environment of business, no one person or group can have all the answers or can have thought about all the different things. Senior leaders have more problems on their plate that they can ever solve, more fires than they can ever put out. And it would then be on you to really bring your angle. And so don't assume they've already seen it or already thought through it. The most creative and innovative organizations have what Amy Edmondson calls intellectual friction. So it's this productive tension that comes from the different perspectives and challenging each other respectfully. Now, of course, I'm telling you this as to you be mindful with your senior leaders. Don't make assumptions that they know everything. Some of the senior leaders may not be willing to engage with you in that kind of dialogue, and you will pick that up. But don't assume by default that they don't want to see a leader who has conviction, that they don't want to have a intellectual dialogue and this kind of friction because they realize, oh, that's what makes us better. While I encourage you to tread this carefully, the point here is to recognize the potential mental trap presuming senior leaders know more. Okay, now the fourth belief that I want to call out here is when managers believe that good leaders are constantly available. This often masquerades as servant leadership. It's really a tough one for me because I believe in servant leadership, but more often than not, it is misconstrued or misinterpreted as always being available. But you can undermine both your own effectiveness and your team's growth when you're always available. When you're always there to solve problems and answer questions, organizational psychologists actually call this learned helplessness. your team becomes dependent on you rather than developing their own problem solving capabilities and working with the assumption that they can be resourceful. They have a whole team to go to. There's probably resources online. There are SOPs, standard operating procedures, or there are instructions, or there are other people that they can ask, or they can Google it, or they can simply just try something. So instead of always being available, try setting clear boundaries around your availability. For example, you can be very explicit and say, hey, I have focused work every day from 2 to 4 p.m. Unless something is really urgent, in which case, please give me a phone call. Otherwise, I will get back to your questions later in the afternoon, or even better would be if you add that question to the agenda for our upcoming one-on-one or our next team meeting. So be explicit with your availability. And for some people, it's, hey, I have a block where I'm not available. For other people, it's to introduce the idea of an office hour. And so they trim all those quick questions and them supporting the team to an hour or two in a day where they're available for the team. Other people make it, certain days of the week that they're available or not available, and so forth. When you do, typically your team will only feel like you're not being present or if you're being available if they don't know and it's unpredictable or they can't check. They're sort of left in this limbo state. They don't know when are you going to be available, when are you not, and that prevents them from actually planning their work or their questions in an effective way. But if they do know and you give them those guardrails, then they can adjust, and they will adjust over time. It takes about 2 weeks for them to buy into this new behavior or these new patterns. But if I know my boss is going to respond to my Slack message or my email between 4 and 6 o'clock, and I have a question at 10 a.m., I can start to plan my day and I know I will get an answer in the afternoon. Or there's an office hour at 2 p.m. that I can dial into. If I don't know if you're going to be available or if it's happening or when you come back, now I'm sort of like feeling stuck and might not know where to go. So it's the communication and the predictability. Last but not least, the final mental trap that I want to allude to here is that showing uncertainty or admitting mistakes will undermine your authority. This couldn't be further from the truth. Studies in organizational behavior consistently show that leaders who demonstrate vulnerability and admit mistakes actually build stronger trust with their teams. When leaders model openness about mistakes or uncertainty, it creates this transparent environment, and other people are also then less afraid to either take risk or admit when things go wrong for them. And you as a leader, you'd want to be aware of that, and you have to role model it. That does not undermine your authority or respect people have for you. It's actually quite the opposite. So, how do you break free from these limiting mental traps? It starts with awareness, like I said in the beginning. Notice when these thoughts come up, challenge them, and then ask yourself, is this thought serving me and my team, or is this holding me back? Remember, your job as a leader isn't to be the hero who does everything, knows everything, and never makes a mistake. Not at all. Your job is to create an environment where your team can do their best work, grow, and succeed. Sometimes despite you, not because of you. Before we wrap up, I want to mention that we're launching the Executive Presence Intensive program in February. It's 4 weeks of focused work on developing your executive presence, breaking free from these kind of limiting beliefs and more. We'll talk about confidence. We'll talk about managing your emotions when under pressure and under fire or when being challenged. We talk about executive communication and much more. Registration opens February 1st, and you can find all the details in the show notes. That's it for today's episode. If you found this helpful, please share it with other leaders who might be finding themselves with similar mental traps. These are very common, and there might be a friend, a colleague, a coworker out there who would appreciate hearing this too. And that's it for today. Until next time, keep showing up as a leader people love to work with. If you enjoyed this episode, then check out 2 other awesome resources to help you become a leader people love to work with. This includes a free masterclass on how to successfully lead as a new manager. Check it out at arcova.org/masterclass. The second resource is my best-selling book, The Confident and Competent New Manager: How to Quickly Rise to Success in Your First Leadership Role. Check it out at arcova.org/books or head on over to Amazon and grab your copy there. You can find all those links in the show notes down below.